ETFs are very safe. They're good. It allows for arbitrage. They're listed in 8 other countries, and they work fine. They work fine through FTX scandal.
We could have to decrease our odds slightly for in the 75% this year in the next couple of weeks, depending on what the SEC says about Grayscale. If they say Grayscale has to enter the 19b4 process again, and they have to go through this whole 240-day process, then all of a sudden, like the odds of it happening before the end of the year are going to have to decrease. But that's another reason why we're so different on 2024 versus 2023.
Bloomberg's senior ETF analysts, Eric Balchunas and James Seyffart, are increasingly optimistic about the likelihood of a spot Bitcoin ETF being approved by the end of the year. A 3-judge appeals panel in Washington handed Grayscale Investments LLC a big win on Tuesday in its case against the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, theoretically paving the way for a U.S. exchange-traded fund. However, whether Grayscale will be the first to list such a product is far from settled. The court said Grayscale presented uncontested evidence that there is a 99.9% correlation between Bitcoin's spot market and CME futures contract prices. In early August 2023, Bloomberg ETF specialists Eric Balchunas and James Seyffart estimated a 65% probability for the approval of a spot Bitcoin ETF. However, as August draws to its conclusion, and in light of a U.S. court siding with Grayscale over a legal tussle against the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the pair have revised their prediction, now pegging the likelihood at 75%. Under SAB number 121, an entity responsible for safeguarding crypto assets for platform users should present a liability on its balance sheet at fair value to reflect that obligation, as well as a corresponding asset. During interview, James Seyffart said, the SAB 121 rule, which prohibits banks from holding cryptocurrencies, poses a challenge for the settlement process because banks traditionally serve as intermediaries responsible for creating and redeeming ETF shares. Let's move towards the few clips from interview.
Eric and I have talked to a bunch of people in this race, if you will, in this spot Bitcoin ETF race, and pretty much everyone had the same kind of thing. Like, we thought Grayscale was going to win, but we didn't think it would be like this. So the language was very strong, complete, utter takedown of the SEC's arguments of the last few years. The last 10 years, you mentioned Winklevoss filed 10 years ago. There's like a list of 30 different things. Like Dahlia Blass famously in 2018, I think, or 2017, issued this whole thing about all these things that need to be solved. The vast majority of them have been solved, but one of them is the fraud and manipulation stuff that they've denied the most recent set of applications on, which is what Grayscale went to lawsuit over, right? The whole lawsuit, the language, all it comes back to is the SEC can't say there's fraud and manipulation on the spot market, but not the futures market, and allow Bitcoin futures ETFs, but not allow spot Bitcoin ETFs. Basically, they need to treat like situations alike. And like you said, we expected Grayscale to win. We were actually early. I was arguing with people on Twitter. Everyone was telling me this is a frivolous lawsuit by Grayscale, and they're not going to win. And then the oral arguments happened, and we immediately that day went to a 70% chance that Grayscale was going to win. So we've gone from Grayscale filing this no way they're going to win frivolous lawsuit to them utterly dominating the SEC in court, right? Like, we saw the language in the oral arguments was pretty strong, but the judges were just asking questions. And I thought they could win 3-0, and this was a unanimous 3-0 decision. So the unanimity
3-0 decision from 3 judges, from 3 different presidents, from 3 different basically political ideologies. I mean, this was just an absolute back alley beating.
This is an underrated point, in my opinion. I think the judge who wrote the rejection or the ruling was a Trump appointee. So you're like, okay, well, they're clearly against the Dems who Gensler is one, and they don't like maybe a lot of regulation. You could list, but the other 2 are from Democratic presidents. You've got 2 Democratic judges that are like, yeah, okay, Rao, you can actually write this. And the fact that they all just sort of supported her, I think matters because, again, we go over the legal aspects of this all the time, and that's important. But there's also the political aspects. Does Gensler have the support of his party? Does the party want this? And the more you find Democrats moving, whether it's in the court or in the Congress, and again, in the public relations arena, the more I think, there's less cover for him to set up and move the goalposts and create some new reason they can't launch them. And so this is, to me, half legal, half, PR politics. And so I think that 3-0 is important because of that political aspect.
I was confident to go above 90%. It hasn't really gotten a lot of coverage, but this Hashdex filing, The way that they're going to go about, so with the custody, like Eric brought up, they basically, if they want to start denying these things, they, like you said, they need to revoke futures, or they need to deny them on things that do not affect the futures market, the futures, Bitcoin futures, right? So because we have Bitcoin futures ETFs, they can't do something that affects both of them. Custody is one of them. Settlement is another. The actual settlement of the underlying Bitcoin. I don't know how detailed you've gotten to SAB 121, but basically banks can't hold cryptos, and banks are the intermediaries that kind of settle on like this creation redemption process of ETF. So at some point you have to get the Bitcoin into the ETF and back and forth when you're creating or redeeming shares. And this Hashdex application basically sets it up so that it happens on a regulated exchange, CME, and you're just trading Bitcoin futures for an underlying spot, which is not the most efficient way to get spot exposure, right?
German investment bank Berenberg said in a research report Wednesday, it is quite possible that the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission will prepare alternative arguments to justify continued rejections of spot Bitcoin ETF applications based on concerns about the spot Bitcoin market. The United States Securities and Exchanges Commission has delayed making a decision on BlackRock's spot Bitcoin ETF application. The company is the latest in the line of delays announced on August 31st. In the interview, Eric Balchunas expressed the view that BlackRock's primary objective is to create a successful product. He explained that there is a traffic light system where BitX and BitO are considered red light ETFs, while a Bitcoin spot ETF would be a green light ETF. Let's move towards the few clips from interview.
If BlackRock wasn't in the mix, and Fidelity, I think they're both, kind of, I would call them like the adults in the room type asset managers.
Every room. Yeah.
They are the establishment. Yeah. And a lot of people who work there work in Congress. It's like there's a revolving door between, not Congress, but just in SEC and the Treasury. There's somewhat of a revolving door, especially with BlackRock. I just have to think like Larry Fink is probably behind sort of arguing his case. And that's a big deal. Again, the BlackRock factor has always been a big variable here. But to that article's point, it's possible. Yeah, I mean, I just think it would look desperate. And if they already lost a legal case in an embarrassing fashion, it just makes them look like what's the word? Like petulant almost. Like we just hate crypto, or we just
tantruming children. That's what it makes them look like. Yeah.
And look, I get it. They're trying to protect investors, but again, the problem with the protect investors thing with them is that they've already approved Bitcoin futures ETFs, which are arguably worse because they have to roll. So the BitO is trailing Bitcoin by 8% this year, and they approved a 2x Bitcoin futures ETF. So we have a traffic light system, and in our traffic light system, BitX and BitO are red light ETFs, whereas a Bitcoin spot ETF would be green light.
When BlackRock filed, Eric and I were talking about the fact that BlackRock filed a spot Bitcoin ETF, and then all of a sudden we had a bunch of crypto people saying this isn't an ETF, this is a trust. So yeah, we try, like Eric said, we're just trying to be right.
And then there's all these, like, I guess the crypto community seems splintered into a couple factions. And there's definitely a faction that thinks BlackRock is just launching the ETF as an exit move. And BlackRock is purposely putting news out to hype the price. And so people are trying to actually almost like play BlackRock as the Fed and what they're doing and how to trade around that. And sometimes there's just nothing there. I think BlackRock generally just wants to have a successful product, but you get a lot of interesting stuff in the comments for sure. I got to say, like, it's probably one of the most entertaining areas of FinTwit by far. A lot of characters, a lot of energy. We travel amongst ETF issuers and financial advisors, and they're just a little more conservative, generally speaking. I think crypto, it just, I don't know, it's got like a little bit of a, I don't know, punk rock vibe. It's very excitable. I think so. There's a lot of people who are, I guess just really optimistic. And, there's a little bit of like us versus them. And I do find that one of the interesting things that we find is that there is this tension between, hey, this ETF might get approved. It's BlackRock. Wow, all this potential money could come in. My price will go up. But then there's this other side that's like, wait a second. We want to like let Larry Fink involved in our little punk rock scene over here. Isn't that exactly who we were fighting?
The approval of a spot Bitcoin ETF could be a game changer for the crypto industry, as it would allow a wider range of institutional investors to access the market. ETFs are popular because they allow market participants to invest in cryptocurrencies without having to purchase the underlying digital assets themselves. The SEC may be gearing up to develop alternative reasons for rejecting spot Bitcoin ETFs. This wraps up our discussion for today. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you found this information valuable, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel to stay informed with the latest news and videos. Thanks for joining us.